I am totally illiterate. Philosophy is easy. Anyone could do it. Totally illiterate.
But we're kind of in a funny place of just in a kind of panicked, the text is about to be over, and we're all sort of trying to figure out what we just read. And we have a lot of condensed arguments that are good in just sort of compartmentalized places, but the overview questions are still really hard. And in particular, accounting for why did this text have to be this way? Why did it have to be this long? This is one of Derrida's very longest texts. This is a guy who writes a lot of extended essays, but this is very long and very can appear to be very repetitious. Dear God, no pun intended, but like it can appear to be very like he could have won his argument, at least from my perspective, basically immediately. And he goes on for as long as he does, and just trying to account for why that is a background concern. But Nona had these two really good quotes that can help us access these questions. So one is already on the screen, but the other is last paragraph on 104. So I'm thinking we do today. We goof around a bit, trying to overview with some key paragraphs. I also remember, like, Rigi, you want to talk about maybe just the sort of almost literal link of Pharmacon to drugs or to which I also want to talk about because I'm an enthusiastic user of drugs. And if you have any drugs, I would appreciate you giving them to me. But I think, and that goes for everybody. But I think that it's really is quite relevant. And of course, Derrida was somebody who was addicted to basically Ritalin for his whole life.
Well, it's just like me, man.
Yep, just like you. Yeah, exactly. No, really, it's really, yeah. And he really struggled with it, particularly early in his life when he failed his entry into the ENS, either his entry or his graduate. I forget what it was, but basically, really important exam because he like stayed up 3 nights in a row. Then when he went to the exam, he just turned in a blank page and he failed it. So like he eventually developed a more regular schedule. But even late into his career, like he typed out his roommate at the Difference conference when he said that the night before when he gave the Difference paper, he was literally up the entire night just typing. So it's like he got arrested in Prague because supposedly someone planted drugs on him. And I think that could have very well have happened. I don't know. But I also know that Derrida, I wouldn't put it past him to have drugs on it. I mean, he was a drug addict. So it's in a very productive way, but was nonetheless a drug addict. So I think we talk some about that, talk some about these paragraphs and any other new stuff that people want to talk about. And then maybe make a little more progress because we're just so tantalizingly at the end of this text and just make a little more. And I sort of, it's just sort of one of those things like I don't want it to end. It's beautiful text, always. It's very beautiful. I can't read it, but I love it. It's a very good French time.
Look, can you give me a second? I need to get some water.
Yeah,
That's
please.
fine. Before we start.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. The two boys. Oh, and we hit up the Fusus. I forgot about that. Derrida always loves dunking on the Fusus.
Why is that?
Just because Heidegger is so Fusus, just like obsessed and like he loves the Physis, and Derrida's never been convinced of his reading of the Physis in like in Greek thought. And so alternative readings of the Physis in Greek thought is like usually a pressure point Derrida wants to emphasize.
Okay.
Yeah. I always love reading past notes and being like, this was a smart young man who wrote these. So I think this guy had some potential. But yeah, we have, this is like, I don't think ever in all of Derrida, there is another example of this, of Derrida saying, reread what I just said to you, which is, it's a certain way, a very aggressive gesture, but is also like, could not put more emphasis right on it. So it's really good to go back to. Ghost. He also says goose. And then he remarks on that he just said goose. And then he said,
Yeah, I mean that passage was like really difficult.
yeah, we should go through it really slowly because I think it's really important, and it's we're gonna get sort of an explanation of why inside and outside one gets, we have reasons why it might be privileged as an opposition or be more important than, say, other opposition. I think it's like, I don't think it's wrong that deconstruction is like portrayed as, hey, you got all these oppositions, dude, and you got to make some trouble for them. That's not wrong, but it's always it's always good when we can like specify, like in this text, what oppositions matter, or in general, what oppositions matter, and then here, and the idea that this paragraph, which doesn't talk about reading, like, let me make sure, but doesn't say anything about reading directly, is then immediately turned into like, it says every model of classical reading is exceeded. So we have like a methodological. So this is not a methodological paragraph explicitly, right? Or like how to read, but that's then how it's recast. So we're gonna get Pharmacon explanation. We're gonna get why is inside outside meant. We're gonna get why that helps us read deconstruction, and distinguish deconstruction from other reading. Jeff Bington will always say deconstruction is a set of manners of reading, which is like, it's like just good manners. I mean, basically, but it's that's a different meaning of the word manners, but it's always a funny. I don't mind saying methodology just to clarify kind of what we're talking about. Derrida, of course, will say, yeah, it's not a method because every time you read in deconstruction, you kind of are supposed to invent reading like all over again. Like your method is kind of supposed to come from what you're reading and kind of like almost like a synthetic a priori, just like you read it and you're like, he's like total invention. So it's like, that's not a method, but it's like, there's some guidelines, some regularities, some ways. It's very, because, if a student is like, or anyone is like, hey, how does deconstruction read? And you're just like, well, man, you just invent what reading means anew every time you read. It's like, it's not very helpful, right? You have to have some things to grab onto. So, yeah. So, Okay. Okay, is everybody here, or are we still, or
But Paisley is missing. But
oh yeah, Paisley's not coming, sadly.
yeah.
Okay. So all right, yeah, so I just want to check where we are. Okay, cool. All right, so this is like a real gamer of a paragraph. Okay, who wants to read this paragraph for us?
I could read. I don't know how my microphone sounds, but
No, your microphone sounds totally good. Please.
okay. It is not enough to say that writing is conceived out of this or that series of oppositions. Plato thinks of writing and tries to comprehend it, to dominate it, on the basis of opposition as such. In order for these contrary values, good, evil, true, false, essence, appearance, inside, outside, etc., to be in opposition, each of these terms must be simply external to the other. Which means that one of these oppositions, the oppositions between inside and outside, must already be accredited as the matrix of all possible opposition. And one of the elements of the system or of the series must also stand as the very possibility of systematicity or seriality in general. And if one got to thinking that something like the Pharmacon or writing, far from being governed by these oppositions, opens up their very possibility without letting itself be comprehended by them. If one got to thinking that it can only be out of something like writing or the Pharmacon, that the strange difference between inside and outside can spring. If, consequently, one got to thinking that writing as a Pharmacon cannot simply be assigned a site within what it situates, cannot be subsumed under concepts whose contours it draws, leaves only its ghost to a logic that can only seek to govern it insofar as logic arises from it. One would have to then bend into strange contortions what could no longer even simply be called logic or discourse. All the more so, if what we have just imprudently called a ghost can no longer be distinguished with the same assurance from truth, reality, living flesh, etc. One must accept the fact that here, for once, to leave a ghost behind will in a sense be to salvage nothing.
Okay, thank you. So a few things. So let's just take it step by step. Okay. So first gesture. Okay, it's not enough to say that writing is conceived out of this or that series of oppositions. So we're not saying so. First, it's not good enough to say Plato thinks writing as emerging from like sophist versus philosopher, sensible versus intelligible, true versus false. So if we were trying to say, you could say like, well, Plato doesn't really think writing, he just thinks writing like as an add-on to his sort of oppositions already, to this opposition and that opposition, right? And Derrida's like, okay, that's not good enough. All right, so what's the raising of the stakes here? They're upping the ante here. Well, the raising the stakes is here that writing is not an issue for this or that Platonic opposition, and Plato doesn't try to fit writing into this or that opposition to understand it. It's that how do I make this bigger? One sec. So it's not this or that opposition. No, don't make it way bigger. It tried to explain it to me. Okay. It looked like it did an okay job, but I just, yeah, shut up, computer. Sorry, I apologize, Chet, or whatever computer is watching this. Thank you for all you do. But it's that opposition as such is how Plato tries to dominate, domesticate, get a hold of writing, right? Okay, so okay, so we're one step above this or that opposition, okay? Then Derrida say, okay, why? Okay, in order for these contrary values, and please, if either you have questions or if something doesn't make sense, please just interrupt me, or if you want to say something or whatever. I'm just
No, it's focused for now. Only can you scroll a bit down on the text because I can't see what you're writing.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, not at all. No, thank you. That's important information. Okay.
So
Yeah, good.
yeah. So like we had this moment when Pharmacon itself became the outside, right? So the artificiality of the Pharmacon, that was the section about the triangles, etc., right? I think so.
Sounds
Yeah. So like in that sense, insofar as it itself then becomes the outside, it precedes this this distinction, or how exactly does it work? Is it like this?
So I think that yeah. So I think that part of the reason why there's artificiality moment is important, but I think that writing in Pharmacon, because of course writing is called a Pharmacon in the Thuth myth, right? Is part of the reason why Derrida seems to be piling it on and just have so many things proving the same thing is that writing is sort of the outside, no matter what writing is, and sort of no matter what Plato is talking about. So like for example, with memory, there is the kettle logic section, right? Of like, okay, no matter what writing is, it's external to memory. And even if it's necessary, even if we use it for memory, it doesn't affect us. But even if it does harm our memory, it still totally has nothing to do with our memory. It's that it's writing's sort of structural position is so outside basically no matter what Plato is talking about, right? No matter whether Plato's talking about health and triangles and being a doctor, right? No matter whether Plato is talking about memory and the eidos, right? No matter whether Plato is saying that writing is like so internally you have to write stuff on the soul, still writing again and again is gestured as the outside, the outside, the outside, the outside, no matter how much it seems to exceed this opposition. And I think Derrida's argument here, his thrust here, and the reason why this is kind of climactic as a paragraph is, hey, there's only like one way to explain such desire to always put writing on the external side, no matter how much the argumentation makes it really internal. And that is that writing maybe makes trouble in conditions something like opposition as such, or in general, that philosophy and Platonism and metaphysics needs opposition and inside and outside to function. We can talk about why that is, I mean, and what the metaphysics of present stuff is and such. And there's something fundamentally threatening about writing and Pharmacon to that. And one couldn't explain just sort of how writing in every textual situation is demeaned, externalized, dominated by Plato, unless it's sort of bigger than any individual opposition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have opposition as such, right? And then we're going to talk about inside and outside. So each of these terms to be in opposition, I think this argument can appear really complex or more complex than it is. His argument is just like, for any opposition to function, right, it has to rigorously say one of the terms has an inside or an internality that is not penetrated or contaminated by the other term. And if it is, there's no opposition. So we need inside and outside, internality and externality, to be the matrix of all possible oppositions, because we don't have any, there's no opposition without inside and outside is another way to say it. Just like no such thing as opposition as such and in general without inside outside. So it's like the opposition or sine qua non of opposition in general. So does that make sense? Or
Yeah, I think that one was easier. So
yeah,
that
okay.
was
Okay, cool. Okay, so and one of the elements of the system or of the series is also stand in as the very possible. It's like what my initial response is, why must it? But we can maybe maybe suspend that a bit. Why does one thing have to be? Why do we need an exemplar? Because he's obviously saying writing is what writing and inside outside is what makes systematicity or seriality possible. So when he's saying systematicity or seriality, that could be like seriality here. He just means like, you know, this is a series of oppositions. Why can we posit them as a series? What allows us to unite them? And when we say the system of Western metaphysics, what makes it a system? What makes it hold together in a coherent, identifiable way? That has to be writing inside, outside. That has to make all of this possible. And if we take that seriously, then we're inviting drugs and ghosts into Western metaphysics in a way that Plato would never sign, even though his text seems to call for it. And that's an important thing we probably want to talk about at some point in just, deconstructive reading. What would an author sign versus what their text does? And so it's like deconstruction always happens like in this difference between what a text does and what it says. And we can talk about why that's always the case at some point, but just trust me for now. And Derrida's point is Plato opens up this possibility of thinking writing as like conditioning Western metaphysics, giving it its unity, giving it its systematicity, even though he doesn't want that. And then we have this like tease sort of, just as a clarity, just one point. This is a very clear rhetorical of just like, if one got to thinking, Derrida believes all of these things, right? So every one of these statements are just things Derrida is saying, I think this is true based on my reading. There's and if one got to thinking, it's sort of like all throughout he said, writing, or if you want, the Pharmacon. Oh, he even does that here. But other times he's like, he even adds if you prefer the writing, or if you prefer the Pharmacon. So he's a little more playful about it. But it's just like, Derrida just believes all the things he's about to say. Okay. So something like the Pharmacon or writing can't be governed by these oppositions. It can't be governed by oppositional logic at all. So there are points in this text where there's like a nod to Hegel, adding Hegel to it. Don't need to talk so much about that. We've talked plenty about Hegel in previous sessions. But the claim is just, there's a claim of a strong condition of possibility claim that whatever Plato is trying to talk about with writing in the Pharmacon, it gets us inside and outside, and that gets us all oppositions in general. Okay? And there's something about, and this is something that Nona has brought up a lot, there's something about a decision of Platonism to say no to this, its own origin, sort of writing and the Pharmacon and drugs and ghosts are what Plato needs and discovers and what philosophy needs and discovers, but it sort of can't just, it cannot sit with that, basically. It's like it feels, it needs to then domesticate the play that has made it possible. And that gesture of not being able to sit with ghosts, not being able to talk with ghosts, to insist on oppositional logic, and we'll talk about how that also means insisting on metaphysics of presence. That's going to be for Derrida just the fundamental gesture of Platonism and of metaphysics and the fundamental decision. Like Derrida also loves metaphysics, right? Loves Western metaphysics. How could you not? I mean, it's awesome. There's tons of cool stuff in it, but this foundational gesture is kind of Western metaphysics trying to be less awesome than it is, in limiting drugs, writing, positional logic. Okay, so then, okay, we keep, if one got to thinking, right, again, this is just Derrida saying what he thinks, that writing as a Pharmacon cannot simply be assigned a site within what it situates. Okay, so this cannot be assigned a site within Platonism, within metaphysics, within philosophy. Cannot be subsumed under concepts whose contours it draws. So if philosophy, in order to function, needs the Pharmacon, needs writing, then it cannot comprehend in a total way what makes it possible. Because what makes it possible is prior to it, and what it does will always presume or assume what it's trying to domesticate. So philosophy can't explain or fully domesticate writing just a priori, insofar as writing makes it possible. But that doesn't mean that, philosophy can't try, and boy, it tries, right? That's Derrida's argument that writing or the Pharmacon leaves only its ghost. And so for Derrida, ghosts, this is why he gets into hauntology, and so ghosts are neither present nor absent, and they do not have a proper body. They do not have a proper place. So writing leaves its ghost and its trace in Western metaphysics, and that's sort of the whole Derridian reading strategy, is trying to find those ghosts and to let them speak, rather than trying to exorcise them or chase them away. And then leaves only its ghost to a logic. So it's logic itself, right? It's not a logic. But, he's going to say, can only seek to govern it insofar as logic arises from it. So logic doesn't get a world, and philosophy doesn't get a world where the ghost doesn't condition it. So any governance of it is going to be a priori not work in a total way. We can talk some about what, because that's a tricky sort of conditional argument, but that's the argument here. And then one would then have to bend into strange contortions what could no longer even simply be called logic or discourse. So all discourse has to be logical, right? There's a certain limit about how much you can just talk to ghosts or just be on drugs, right? If you are just permanently, fundamentally on drugs and never have a moment of sobriety, it's not good, right? There's no moment of text to read. There's no discourse now. But similarly, if you think everyone's a ghost, you only speak to ghosts. You only speak to what's not there. If presence and reason and logic, mean nothing to you, their talking isn't possible. Writing isn't possible in the form of discourse, in the form of logical writing. Writing is possible as some sort of transcendental condition of possibility, something like madness, something like Pharmacon, something like drug stuff. So when philosophy talks about writing, it twists and contorts and changes. And Derrida's point is maybe we push that a little farther. That's what he's trying to do with this Plato's pharmacy structure. And it would transform logic, discourse, Western metaphysics, etc. And then he says, all the more so if what we have so all the more so meaning we have to do this bending thing. We have to speak, right? You can't not speak. You can't not be sober. You can't not make sense, right? You can't not have logic. That's not going to get you anywhere. Certainly not going to get you to writing or to not domesticating writing. So it's like, one of the examples I always use is like an improv group, like a comedy improv group. That's not where the new happens, okay? If you ever see a comedy improv group, I mean, I'm quite good at them. I mean, come on. But still, it's not really improv, nor is speaking in tongues, nor is like Dada improvisation. Like, you can't improvise or be illogical just because you want to be. Like, you can't just say, okay, I'm not going to do this logic stuff. Thanks, Derrida. You have to. That's why this Derridian reading is necessary. You have to work hard to play hard. So ghost can no longer be distinguished with the same assurance from truth, reality, living flesh. So Derrida's went pretty fast here, but the basic argument is like, insofar as a ghost needs a strong distinction between presence and non-presence, from reality and non-reality, truth and falsity. And I forget what exactly the word is, but I think just BT dubs. Eidos, of course, is idea, or its capital F form. And I think it's eidolon or something like this. And he mentions this text is can mean ghost. It's something like this, right? The ghost stuff comes more with Derrida later, but it's always there. And the argument is like, once we've sort of realized that philosophy needs something that it cannot justify and it cannot ground Pharmacon writing, that also means philosophy can never assure its own secure link to truth, to the difference between a body and living flesh and a ghost. And thus, if we don't find a way to talk with ghosts or a way to do something like ontology, we're going to get nothing, right? That's what this last says, right? One must accept the fact that here, for once, to leave a ghost behind. So it's, he's sort of saying, I don't have the French in front of me, and I just don't trust Barbara Johnson at all. But the argument here, from what I can see, is like, okay, the for once is not, this is a unique situation with Plato, because Derrida thinks this situation with all of philosophy, every tech pretty much, like if you just give up on ghosts, you're kind of not going to be able to do anything. He's saying, well, philosophy in Western metaphysics has always said, well, we can't figure out the ghosts. Ghosts aren't real. And Derrida's, one of my favorite Derrida quotes, like, yeah, ghosts aren't real. So what? Yeah, they're not real. Who cares? That's not an argument. One must have, we have to say, okay, if we leave the ghost behind, if we leave writing behind, if we leave Pharmacon behind, we're not even going to get philosophy. Yeah, okay. I talked for a while, but I don't know. Is this passage clearer now, or?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah, a lot happened.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead if you want to say something.
No. I agree. I think it's clear now.
Maybe just if you scroll a bit down, there's this point just about every model of classic reading is succeeded here at some point. Yeah, I was also wondering what the classical model of classical reading is. Like, it cannot deal with this kind of bending or whatever. I guess.
No, yeah, that's something we should definitely talk about. Okay, so basically, so why does this trouble classical reading? You know, it's not just classical reading, like a particular stereotype of it, but every model of classical reading, he says, right? Like it's like we have an invention of a new, or we're glimpsing the possibility of a new way of reading here. Derrida is quite emphatic, right? So why? I mean, just like because the above wasn't talking about reading at all, right? I mean, at least not explicitly. So let's follow him really slowly here. Okay. Yeah, I just talked for a while. Does somebody else mind reading? I'll read if no one wants to read, but do we want to read just here?
I mean, I can read it.
Okay, thank you.
This little exercise will no doubt have sufficed to warn the reader. To come to an understanding of Plato, as it is sketched out in his text, is already to slip away from the recognized models of commentary, from the genealogical or structural reconstitution of the system. Whether this reconstitution tries to corroborate or refute, confirm or overturn, mark a return to Plato or give him a send-off, in the quite Platonic manner of the Kairein. What is going on here is something altogether different. That too, of course, but still completely different. If the reader has any doubt, he is invited to reread the preceding paragraph. Every model of classical reading is exceeded here at some point, precisely at the point where it attaches to the inside of the series, it being understood that this excess is not a simple exit out of the series, since that would obviously fall under one of the categories of the series. The excess, but can we still call it that, is only certain displacement of the series in a certain folding bag, which will later be called a remark, of a position within the series, or even within its dialectic. Cannot qualified, name it, comprehend it under a simple concept without immediately being off the mark. Such a functional displacement, which concerns differences, and as we shall see, simulacra, more than any conceptual identity signified, is a real and necessary challenge. It writes itself. We must therefore begin by reading it.
Okay, thank you. So this is didn't suffice, by the way, Derrida. We have to the above. It's not obvious how to link this, and we did reread it. So we did everything Derrida asked us to do, which is so. What does this have to do with reading? It's a really important question because this is usually what, and me as somebody who worked in literature studies, taught in literature, and then have now moved to being in a philosophy department, this is like the biggest sort of untranslatable sort of misunderstanding about how philosophy works and how to read philosophy that I consistently have with others and with people who I talk about philosophy with. We can agree a lot on when we're talking about arguments, when we're talking about what an author says at a given place or what a text says in a given way. But here is really where the way that I read philosophy and the way deconstruction reads philosophy becomes just untranslatable, ununderstandable for philosophy as such, and for professional philosophers, and for people who identify strongly with philosophy. And basically it hinges on this, okay? Why are you going to sit and read Plato's text? Okay, what's the point? Okay, well, I want to know what Plato said. I want to know what Plato's arguments are. Okay, that's fine. What are you going to do with that? What are we going to argue about? Because we don't just argue about what this or that sentence says, right? We don't just argue about, okay, what's this passage say? We argue about what Plato said and what Platonism is, right? And what we are, and I always love this example. I had a Plato professor who was like, we're not going to talk about Heidegger on Plato. We're not going to talk about Derrida on Plato. We're just going to read the Plato. Okay? Because we don't care what other people doing philosophy say. We only care what Plato said. Of course, everyone in the class is also themselves somebody speaking on Plato. And so we would have to not listen to each other. So she kind of canceled her class like in that moment, and just nobody noticed. She was like, we can't have this class because I'm just speaking on Plato. You're just speaking on, we should just read the Plato. So at the limit, what that argumentation points to is the fact that Plato's text itself is not anything but is also a text on Plato. So the opposition between, say, so what did we just do, right? We showed that opposition as such, and also systematicity, seriality as such, all depend on and are troubled and shaken up by writing the Pharmacon. Okay, so, well, it's very hard to have a theory of how to read a text without having, for example, Plato's text versus not, just very simply, not Plato's text, what Plato believed versus what he didn't, what is in his text, right? Platonism and what is not. So most of classics scholarship, from what I can tell, really is struggling for a reason why it exists. I love classics. I love study Greek, but classicists have really struggled to justify their own existence. And one of the ways is, okay, we want to figure out what Plato said, what Plato thought, or if they don't say that, they say, well, what was Plato's sort of systematic doctrine? So the phrase they use is Platonic doctrine. So how do we basically how to turn Platonic text into, I get basically lists of philosophical propositions. I don't know, that's kind of mean, but just that's how they say it. And what does that require? Well, this would itself require an inside-outside distinction while reading Plato. So that's his doctrine versus, oh, that's just Plato goofing around with dialogue. That's just Socratic irony, probably the biggest sort of deus ex machina that they use. We really ought. Socrates just joking around whenever something actually has an implication or actually matters in Plato. It's like, well, how do we even believe him? He's just such a wily operator. I don't know. So we need to presume something like philosophy. We need to presume something like philosophy as thought conditioned by opposition as such, in order to justify any classical model of reading. Okay, and so if we just go through some of these, some of this explanation, okay, is already a slip away from recognized models of commentary. So commentary, recognized models of commentary, and just commentary generally requires a clear division between, okay, this text is isolated from me, and I am just saying what this text says, extracting its signification from it. And then the question of what you do with that Because the word commentary, I mean, everyone has different ideas what commentary could be, but to my ear, the general without which not, or the general horizon of commentary is, I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to interpret. I'm just going to accept insofar as I'm just going to try to learn what the text says itself, which is a totally defensible, necessary moment of reading, right? Nobody's saying don't try to do that. It's just that reading can't be reduced to that. So, from the genealogical or structural reconstitution of system. So genealogical would be like, what did Plato really mean? What comes from Plato? What is Plato putting in his text kind of just to argue with? And with someone like Hegel too, this is even more insistent of like, oh, the early Hegel is like, oh, that was before the phenomenology of spirit. Okay, that was like young, sloppy Hegel. We've got the logic, and the logic, that's really like rigorous Hegel. And Hegel himself gets sort of brainwashes himself into like thinking the phenomenology was not necessary. This is, I've just written an essay on this, but basically he sips his own Kool-Aid in that regard, because that Kool-Aid belongs to philosophy. But with Plato, it might be, oh, that was an early dialogue or a later dialogue, and all of these sort of any genealogical model of reading has to presume something like a paternal source of what is significant in the writing you're reading, and that paternal source is going to end up being something that writing as what exceeds opposition as such, and what exceeds also in concurrently things like speech writing, things like speech as the father, writing as the orphan. It's going to cause problems for that. Same for structural reconstitution of a system, right? If you're trying to say, I'm trying to construct Platonism from reading Plato, you got to make decisions on, oh, that's not part of the system. This is. What's a system? Well, a system is this, and it's not that. That's rhetoric, or that's theater, or that's dialogue, right? That's often in forming Platonic doctrine. What I've noticed arguing and talking to Platonists is that they have an incredibly simplistic and hyper-conservative view of what rhetoric or metaphor or fiction are, and they have sort of no way to explain why Plato didn't just tell us what he thought if it was so clear to him, if there wasn't such a clear systematicity, right? But so structural reconstitution of a system, then whether this reconstitution tries to corroborate or refute. So it's not like, are you against Platonism or not? If you try to form something called Platonism, you bite this argument. Confirm or overturn, mark a return to Plato, or give him a send-off in the quite Platonic matter of the current. What's going on here, i.e. me, Derrida, when I'm writing, is something altogether different. That too, of course, so that's the moment when I was like, listen, figuring out what Platonism is systematically, figuring out what Plato seems to have meant to say in a not totalizing but local way. These are necessary parts of reading, right? You can't read Plato without something like Platonism forming, but still completely other. Reread the preceding paragraph. Not as helpful maybe as Derrida could say, but we just did it and it kind of worked. Every model of classical reading has succeeded there at some point. So the basic claim here is every model of classical reading presumes Platonism that I am in the course of deconstructing. So then, precisely at the point, so it's exceeded, where it attaches to the inside of the series. So I would like to go back and look at Barberjots, because this it is hard to follow. But it's whether the precise grammar of the sentence is kind of less, it's like, however it shakes down, it's pretty clear what Derrida is saying here, which is that I think that it has got to be the deconstructive reading. It can't be a model of that. So it's like, so it's precisely at the point where it, the deconstructive reading, attaches to the inside of the series. So this is like when the parasite hooks in, when the virus gets into the cell. So when we go into the soul the doctrine of the soul and we say, hey, you have writing right on your soul. And then like Plato looks down at his soul and is like, you're right, I have writing. And the immortality of the soul's ruined. It exceeds classical reading. And then Derrida has to qualify, right, what excess is here, because excess presumes as a concept, right, just inside outside, or it's seemingly a simple inside outside topology, right? It exceeds, so therefore it's outside. Derrida wants to make things more complex than that. So it being understood that this excess is not a simple exit out of the series, since that would obviously fall under one of the categories of the series. You can't exceed Western metaphysics by not being Western metaphysics. That's what it wants you to do really badly, right? To be identifiably outside. So the excess, but can we still call it that? Is excess going to be a good word if this is all true? Is only a certain displacement of the series, a certain folding back. So this is why Western metaphysics is closed. That its history is, there's nothing other than Western metaphysics. There's no outside Western metaphysics. Folding back onto it means rereading Western metaphysics, remarking upon it in a way that intensifies, in a structural way, in a forceful way, the displacements and the glitches in the system, glitches in the matrix, sort of Western metaphysics, to intensify them, to give them more force, to give them a place to speak, and hopefully give us new concepts for thinking about them. It being understood, we're never going to have a non-metaphysical concept. We're never going to have a end to Western metaphysics. Once the concept of end and the concept of outside belong to Western metaphysics, it's game over. It's a priori. There's no way to have anything other than Western metaphysics. And this historically has been proven just sort of on planet Earth, where there's nothing but the West anymore. There's nothing other than Western metaphysics. There's no non-Western government or constitution in the world. That's over. Okay, I don't know if that's helpful for you all, you guys, but like that's I don't know. Any thoughts or questions or anything?
No, that was super helpful. Just gotta digest it a bit again. But yeah, we can move on to the next thing if you want to.
Okay, great.
Because you already spent like 8 over here.
Yeah, no, that's true. We just spent an hour on these 2 paragraphs, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was very helpful, though. I appreciate it a lot. I think it's a lot clearer now.
I'm glad. Well, it's like Derrida said, we just had to reread the above paragraph. I mean, that's like, duh. I just like, come on, man. Okay. So let's go to the type stuff, the typos stuff. Well, even there's the catalytic here. Okay, yeah. So let's wait. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Found it. Okay. I couldn't see it for some reason. All right. Okay, great. Yeah, this is great. So we can talk. So I'm going to read and then just ask for thoughts for y'all. So I don't talk at you for an hour again. But I'm glad it's helpful. I just, I've been in seminar a lot lately, so I'm used to apologizing for speaking. I guess that's what that is. Okay. Sorry, can I make a point? Sorry, could I talk for just, sorry. Okay. Okay. I had just found it. Okay, yeah, okay. All right. So I'll just start a little earlier than we have this quote. No, you had said down. Okay. Through this economy of signs, talking, of course, about the fact, right, that sophists are like, hey, I can, I'll teach you a philosophy thing. Just give me $10. And, they don't have a school in the same way. I don't know if you had to pay to go to like Plato's school. I assume so, because there wasn't funding of public education in ancient Greece, right? There was no public education system. So I assume you had to pay. But so it's like kind of, that would be a weird thing to be mad that like tutors make you pay, but like your school, like what's the difference in paying tuition and like paying tutor? Anyway, that's the critique that Derrida's going for. You still have to pay tuition at Plato's school, so no distinction. Okay. But through this economy of science being, we're the Platonic critique really is not necessarily that you sell in of itself, but the sophists just want to make money. They don't really care about the true false thing, right? The sophists are indisputably men of writing. At the moment they are protesting, they are not. But isn't Plato one too, through a symmetrical effective reversal? Not only because he is actually a writer, a banal argument we will specify later on. I forgot about this. Like I was just like Derrida, like, well, of course, reading Socrates' diary or like Socrates' fanfic. Okay. And cannot, whether de facto or de jure, explain what dialectics is without recourse to writing. Not only because he judges that the repetition of the same is necessary in anamnesis, but also because he judges it indispensable as an inscription in the type. So repetition of the same is necessary okay. It is notable that tupos applies with equal pertinence, tupos being the Greek word for type, to the graphic impression and to the eidos as a model. Among many other examples, cf. Republic 402d. This necessity belongs to the order of the law and is posited by the laws. In this instance, the immutable, petrified identity of writing is not simply added to the signified law or prescribed rule like a mute, stupid simulacrum. It assures the law's permanence and identity with the vigilance of a guardian. As another sort of guardian of laws, writing guarantees the means of returning at will as often as necessary to that ideal object called the law. We can thus scrutinize it, question it, consult it, make it talk without altering its identity. All this, even in the same words, is the nobly botea, exactly opposite of Socrates' speech in the Phaedrus. Okay, so thoughts about this, confusion, questions, things to talk about, things that aren't clear?
I think the first thing that I'd like to know, maybe that I'm not sure about, is like it's not his main point, but why can't he explain dialectics without recourse to writing?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I would want to look at the specific examples to be sure I'm exactly right, but I think it's going to go something like dialectics is Socrates returning to himself through the other, right? That's kind of that's the definition we've been going with through and that Derrida gives. The force of this claim, though, my eyebrows went up too, because he's saying, whether de facto or de jure, like he's saying, like, didn't I just describe it to you without referring to writing? Like if I say dialectics is learning about myself through the language of the other, did I just describe it without recourse to writing? And the claim is sort of cheaty here. It's significant. I'm not saying he really is cheating, but it's just like the claim has to be that language of the other, or language which I have a non-immediate relation to, that's recourse to writing. I mean, if I'm dealing with something that I don't see or translate from my intuition, from my soul, from my mind, etc. If I'm dealing with your language, as in not my language, that means I'm interpreting marks, even if you speak them. And so it has to do something with writing. That would be my answer, but it's, yeah.
Okay.
So
I think something happened with the video. The PDF view is now on the full screen. It's not just on the left side.
oh, whoops. Okay. Okay, now it should be.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, the other claim here of being like, laws have to, so like the fact that Socrates says exactly opposite things about the stability of writing, right? Like he says, writing is stable and that's how laws work. And he's going to say that here. But also writing can't be, damn you, AI assistants. Okay. Quiet, boy. That's what you just did be saying to AI for the rest of our lives. The exact opposite argument of, because speech is like, supposedly because you have the father there, the speaker there, it's solidified. The meaning is stable because like any divergence can be stabilized by like, oh, did you mean this? No, I meant that. Anybody who's ever actually talked to another person knows that having them there actually can often impede stabilizing the meaning of what they said, particularly people talking about philosophy, particularly professors of philosophy. It's very rare that a professor of philosophy remembers what they said a few moments ago. But they're dunking on philosophy professors. That's I'm just great like that. But I think that the opposite statement is here, which is that writing, because it is petrified or stable, is what allows it to be law. And so it's just like, because Plato has contradiction where there should be consistency, right? There's no reason why writing should be this difficult to talk about or to make. Just like in principle, why, if we think writing is a simple thing, like marks are simple, like why is it so? Why do you keep saying opposite things about it? Plato, well, part of it's got to be because it exceeds opposition, because there is something special sauce about writing that Platonism can't capture. Okay. So, yeah. So those were two good. So any other thoughts about this quote or about the stuff that we might want to talk? Okay, cool. Okay. So then we'll think about this.
Okay, just maybe very quickly.
No, yeah, go good. No, take it.
Just so that writing always says the same, always signifies the same is good for the law, right? It kind of like you can go back to it. It's always signifying the same, but for the eidos, it's bad, right? The in writing, the eidos is not present, right? The only thing that is repeated is not the signified eidos, but just the signifier. But so this is kind of like this weird point with which Plato is like, the eidos should be repeated as identical, and writing should be able to do that, but also because like, so it, as in the case of law, but at the same time kind of writing is he does talk about that later on, but it's accessible to everyone, right? You can't choose to whom you're speaking, and so it can be ripped out of its, I don't know, context or whatever. And so that's just kind of bad at this point. It's just referring to itself, and the itis is not present anymore, or something along those lines.
That's all correct. Yeah, totally. So the contradictions in Platonism give very strong reasons for writing being good and even necessary, including for the eidos, but also give reasons why it's dangerous, needs to be excluded. And that sort of Platonic inability to make sense of writing and to ground its account of writing is a symptom that Derrida is interpreting with a very broad concept of symptom, basically, but just like is why, even because we need symptoms and we need like clues, right? Because we can't just affirm the Pharmacon or affirm ghosts or affirm madness or affirm writing insofar as writing is absence to self, chains of signification that only get meaning through their difference. Like you can't just be, oh, okay, Derek, you're just like, okay, I'm going to be pro writing now. Like writing, there's something about Plato is hitting on. There's a reason why Plato has to domesticate writing and make it sort of has to bend to integrate it. And it's because there's something that writing points to that is not reasonable, logosizable, logical, discoursable, etc. So pointing out these contradictions, and we can go very precisely at what the sort of eidos stuff is. I think that like writing both helps the eidos and hurts it. It's not good or bad in that context either, right? So the eidos needs memory insofar as we are finite beings, and that in fact only finite beings in the end can. This is not something Plato says, but something that Derrida tries to prove. Unfolding it, only finite beings can even have ideas, actually, because only finite beings can have the presentation and the memory necessary for an eidos. And the eidos, so it kind of goes both ways. Sorry, I explained that in a way that it looks like the conditionality goes both ways. My apologies, just going fast, but like it does go both ways in a certain way. But the eidos needs memory, not simple recalling or recollection, or not simple recalling, I mean. But if you just, it's sort of like, you apologized to me, but it didn't seem like you really meant it. You just said the words of an apology, but like, I could tell that, you were really sorry. And it's like, if you recall the eidos, there's a sense in which, if you just recall it, there's still an externality to it, right? It hasn't really been presented. But if you write it on your soul and you recollect the eidos in a way that necessarily intervenes on it or has you inscribing it or has some sort of inevitable change in it, then the eidos isn't the repetition of the same, isn't the true, isn't more being than non-beings, right? So it's like you need writing as repetition of the same is needed for the eidos, but is also going to make it not good enough, not divine, and also not stable. Not going to make it. It's like, I forgot the eidos because I'd written it on my soul. I didn't think I would need to remember it, right? I had it written on my soul. Why would I need to remember? But that's a sort of slipshod response. But I don't know. Does that help, or is there anything else?
No, that was it. Like a bit later, I think in the reading, there's also this point where Plato starts to, or Socrates starts to differentiate between kind of like, as Derrida puts it, dialectical writing and non-dialectical writing, where there's this like this good brother of writing. It's an interesting passage.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Yeah, so maybe what we'll do is sort of, because I can't think of, if someone has a passage for Pharmacon and drugs, I really want to talk about that, but I don't have a passage in mind for it. So maybe I do know as we get closer to the end, we get more drugs talk for sure. Um, and I'll put my like when I post this online, I'll put my address in the description for anybody to send me drugs that I can take for the next reading. But for now, since I don't have any drugs, we don't have a drug passage. Maybe we go back to where we were and just read a little bit more and keep and try to zoom in on any Pharmacon passage we can. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's fine. I think I can try and recognize passages about drugs later on as well, and I'll send them to you if it makes sense.
Yeah, please. Yeah, so we'll just go through. I didn't ask for one. I didn't know, and I mean, Nona didn't ask me before they sent me these. I mean, it was completely unsolicited. It was incredibly rude. But you know, we went through it. So just, but is there anything? Is there anything though? If that's not satisfying, or is it that you're wondering about the discussion of drugs or Reiki, or wondering about Pharmacon that we could talk about just now before we keep reading? Or it's like
not anything that comes to mind right now. I think we can just continue, and I think it's better for like the next session.
okay, perfect. Okay, yes. But we had some pederasty talks. I remember at some point, but I always forget. Yeah, this is what we were just talking about. We got these two. This will be cool. I don't know how close we got to it in our read. Not that it super matters, but we want to read all of it. Okay. I never could get into Victor Hugo. I think it kind of sucks. But I don't know.
Based.
I don't know. It's just like I did watch the Les Mis, and I think I watched it when I was like a Marxist Zizekian, and I like cried watching Les Mis, and like now if I like was like in the like as a ghost watching myself cry watching Les Mis, I'd be like, God, this kid's not gonna make it. What an idiot. Okay.
I mean, if you don't feel like that, you're not going forward.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's true. Yeah, it's good. It's good to bully your past self a bit. If you're not doing that, then you're too similar to it. Yeah. When I was presenting on his Searle, I like made this joke basically that like, you know how professors will find one argument when they're like 24 and then just be like, all right, I'm never going to think again. And I was like, now I found that argument in Ideas 2 that I'm going to say forever. And I said it to my historical professor, who thought it was funny, but I was a little embarrassed because I was like, she's going to think I'm talking about her because she's like still excited about Ideas 2. I'm excited about Ideas 2 in my own way. Okay. Okay, yeah, this one I got really excited about because we were talking about, this was where we ended off 2 sessions ago, back our last sort of actual reading session, was I got really excited about democracy here, and the sort of place of democracy in Platonist thought. Of course, philosophy has always hated democracy, and I think this is both not a coincidence and not an interrupted tradition up to now. Like it's, I wrote an article like a long time ago. It's like I think one of my first articles I wrote. It's like about the Deleuzean critique of democracy and how fundamental and just sort of virulent it is. There is a like really profound distrust of democracy. Conversely, it's interesting that never has philosophy flourished ever in any state that doesn't have something like either democracy or an extremely developed civic life and a sort of university academic freedom model in the like Kaiser university tradition. Like even when Germany was not a democracy, its university structure was recognizably academic freedom focused. That's why someone like Hegel could become the most famous philosopher in the world in his life. So it's very interesting that like it's clear that like philosophy and the atmosphere of democracy are in some way kindred in a fundamental fashion. Like you don't have a whole lot of count. I mean, there's of course Athens, right? I mean, I think that's the only example I need, but there's more examples than that of something about Of course, Athens killed Socrates, but did you know that Socrates also probably participated in a fascist totalitarian coup against Athens, or at least was okay with it? I'm always saying like, I'm always defending the trial of Socrates in this reading group. But he, of course, philosophy hates democracy. Democracy hates philosophy in a certain way. But if, it seems like, well, in Nazi Germany, how good were the philosophers? Would be the next place I would go, and then like be a funny thing too. How do people like Heidegger's work? Was the Nazi work better or worse? Is it all Nazi? Anyway, so democracy and philosophy in general for me is just an interesting topic. So I just riff a bit there. But writing in a so here Derrida is making a gesture with democracy and writing that's like putting democracy almost like in the structure of the universe in a certain way. There's something really strange about it if you push it all the way. Because like insofar as everything's writing, right, including matter, including everything is differential, everything is absent to itself, everything, things that happen have to be recorded in order to happen. Everything's writing. And writing is democratic. It's almost like we have an a priori argument for democracy based on the structure of the universe. I'm going very fast, but y'all see like we kind of get there very quickly, right? I'm down for that, but I just sort of democracy is orgy, debauchery, flea market fair, a bazaar. Sounds great. Of constitutions where one can choose. Sounds anxiety inducing, but that is democracy. I have anxiety issues, and I deal with them in part to be more democratic. Where one can, so it's like, so Derrida's point here, just to review, was like constitutions. Democracy is not one constitution in a series of constitutions, right? It's a constitution that is too unstable to even be called a constitution, doesn't have a truth, doesn't have a father, doesn't have an essence. Sort of, this is why he'll later say it's autoimmune. He even loves the Declaration of Independence. He has an essay about how great the Declaration of Independence is. He's just such a patriotic American. Okay. So it's just like democracy and Derrida's something I'll just talk about forever. But okay. I shall read. Okay. Whether it is seen as graphics or as politics, or better, as the whole 18th century in France will do, especially Rousseau, as politicographics, such degradation, so the democratic degradation, from democracy as a degradation from like an empire or a monarchy or a despotism, right? Democracy is always in the philosophical imagination, weak, feminine, unable to decide, multicolored rather than black and white. Such degradation can always be explained in terms of a bad relation between father and son. Desires, says Plato, should be raised like sons. So your internal desires, father something, that obviously, that gets the writing thing in. Okay, I just stop explaining to you because he's about to say it. Let Derrida speak. Writing is the miserable son. Is miserable. Socrates' tone is sometimes, this fucks up. No, okay. it's hard to look at this part of my screen while but I think I'll fix that next time. Socrates' tone is sometimes categorical and condemnatory. Skeptical, that's an English word, but okay. Clear what it means in any case. Denouncing a wayward, rebellious son, an immoderation or perversion, and sometimes touched and condescending. Touched like poignant, like empathetic, like, oh, you're just doing your best, son. So I feel talking to philosophers so often about Derrida. Okay, and condescending, pitying a defenseless living thing, a son abandoned by his father. In any event, the son is lost. His impotence is truly that of an orphan as much as that of a justly or unjustly persecuted patricide. In his commiseration, Socrates sometimes gets quite carried away. Alongside the living, discourse is persecuted and deprived of the aid of a logographer. This was the case with Socrates' own spoken words. There are also half-dead discourses, writings, persecuted for lack of the dead father's voice. Writing can thus be attacked, bombarded with unjust reproaches. Eucendice literatis, that only the father could dissipate, thus assisting his son, if the son had not precisely killed him. Okay, I'll do one more passage that we can talk about. Okay. In effect, the father's death opens the reign of violence. In choosing violence, and that is what it's all about from the beginning, woke up and chose violence. Western metaphysics accuses democracy of waking up and choosing violence. It's choosing violence, and that is what it's all about. You should have just done what your dad said. Okay, come on, how hard is that? In choosing violence, and that is what it's all about from the beginning. And violence against the father, the son, or patricidal writing cannot fail to expose himself to. All this is done in order to ensure that the dead father, first victim, and ultimate resource not be there. Being there is always a property of paternal speech, so presence, and the site of a fatherland. So there's no presence without paternity. Paternity and presence are a priori indissociable. Okay, so thoughts, questions, ideas, things that aren't clear.
Okay. I think it's mostly fine for me at least.
Okay, cool. I always had to tell students like that I'm attacking their dad personally when we talk through this. Like Derrida actually means your dad. He hates your dad. But linking presence and paternity really close is just important metaphorically. When I say metaphorically, I'm like have the Derrida. It's not just a metaphor; they're really linked, but just it appears like metaphor. Okay. Who'd like to keep reading for us, please?
Jan,
Thank you.
Writing the outlaw, the lost son. Plato, we recall, always associates speech and law, logos and nomos, and laws speak. In the personification in the Crito, they speak to Socrates directly, and in the 10th book of the Republic, they address themselves precisely to the father who has lost his son. They console him and urge him to resist his grief. When a good and reasonable man, said I, experiences such a stroke of fortune as the loss of a son or anything else that he holds most dear, we said, I believe, then too, that he will bear it more easily than the other sort. Now,
You're lying about your son dying. You must be not a good and feasible man. Right? Come on, take it like a... Okay, go ahead.
Now, is it not reason and law, logos kai nomos, that extorts him to resist, while that which urges him to give away to his grief is the bare feeling itself? The law declares that it is best to keep quiet as far as possible in calamity. What is the father? We asked earlier. The father is writing. The lost son does not answer this question. It writes itself that the Father is not, that is to say, is not present. When it is no longer a spoken word fallen away from the Father, writing suspends the question, what is, which is always tautologically the question, what is the Father? And the reply, the Father is what is. At that point, a fact is produced that can no longer be thought about within the familiar opposition of father to son, speech to writing. The time has come to recall the fact that Socrates, in the dialogues, plays the role of the father, represents the father, or the elder brother. We will see in a minute what the story is with the elder brother. And Socrates reminds the Athenians, like a father speaking to his children, that in killing him, it is themselves they will hurt most. Let us listen to him in his prison cell. His ruse is infinite, and therefore naive or null. Keep me alive, since I am already dead for you. Remember my request to give me a hearing without interruption. I assure you that if I am what I claim to be, and you put me to death, you will harm yourselves more than me. If you put me to death, you will not easily find anyone to take my place. It is literally true, even if it sounds rather comical, that God has specially appointed me to this city, as though it were a large thoroughbred horse, which because of its because of its great size is inclined to be lazy and needs the stimulation of some stinging fly. Yeah, the ADHD, I guess.
Yeah, no.
It seems to me that God has attached me to the city to perform the office of such a fly. And all day long I never cease to settle here, there, and everywhere, rousing, persuading, reproving every one of you. You will not easily find another like me, gentlemen, and if you take my advice, you will spare my life. I suspect, however, that before long you will awake from your drowsing, and in your annoyance you will take Anecdotes' advice and finish me off with a single slap. And then you will go on sleeping till the end of your days, unless God in his care for you sends someone to take my place. If you doubt whether I am really the sort of person who would have been sent to this city as a gift from God, you can conceive yourselves by looking at it in this way. Does it seem natural that I should have neglected my own affairs and endured the humiliation of allowing my family to be neglected for all these years? The drama queen.
Listen, it's like this is like if it, I haven't seen my wife in years. I've just been following you guys. It's just like it's like.
When I visit myself all the time on your behalf, going to see each one of you privately like a father or an elder brother, and urging you to set your thoughts on goodness. And what pushes Socrates to take the place of the father or elder brother toward the Athenians, a role in which he too will have to be replaced, is a certain voice, which forbids, moreover, more than it bids, and which he obeys spontaneously.
Spontaneously. I said it. I actually said it. By the way, when I said spontaneously, I really thought I was correcting you. That's how weird the word is. Yes, it's spontaneously. Okay.
Yeah, spontaneously, like the good voice in the Phaedrus, for whom the commands of the voice of Logos suffice. The reason for this is what you have often heard me say before on many other occasions, that I am subject to a divine or supernatural experience, which Meletus saw fit to travesty in his indictment. It began in my early childhood, a sort of voice which comes to me, and when it comes, it always dissuades me from what I am proposing to do, and never urges me on. As the bearer of this sign from God, Socrates thus takes voice from the Father. He is the Father's spokesman, and Plato writes from out of his death. All Plato's writing, and we are not speaking here about what it means, its intended content, the declarations of and to the Father made against the graphe that decided his death, is thus, when read from the viewpoint of Socrates' death, in the situation of writing as it is indicted in the Phaedrus. These scenes enclose and fit into each other endlessly, abyssally. The pharmacy has no foundation. Now, what about the accused? Up to now, written speech has had no other status, as it were, than that of an orphan or moribund parricide. And while it becomes perverted in the course of its adventures by breaking with its origin, nothing has yet indicated that that origin was itself already bad. But it now appears that written discourse, in its proper meaning, that which is inscribed in sensible space, is deformed at its very birth. It is not well born, not only, as we have seen, because it is not entirely viable, but because it is not of good birth, of legitimate birth. It is not genius. It is not exactly a commoner, it is a bastard. By the voice of its father, it cannot be allowed, recognized. It is outside the law. After Phaedrus has agreed, Socrates goes on. Socrates, but now tell me, is there another sort of...
Okay.
Okay. But tell me, is there another sort of discourse that is brother to the written speech, but of unquestioned legitimacy? Can you see how it originates and how much better and more effective it is than the other?
Well, no. What sort of
You'll be
discourse?
Phaedrus.
What sort of discourse have you now in mind? What is its origin?
The sort that goes together with knowledge and is written the soul of the learner that can defend itself and knows to whom it should speak and to whom it should say nothing.
Do you mean the discourse of a man who really knows, which is living and animate? Would it be fair to call the written discourse only a kind of host of it?
Yes, precisely.
Phaedrus is such a dipshit. I love it. Okay. Okay, we should probably, so we should probably stop and sort of synthesize a little bit. Thank you. That was a great Socrates. I imagine Socrates has to have quite a commanding voice because it's got to have a deep voice. Okay. So we had a lot of, we stopped about right here, right? So, first of all, just what can we say about this? Does anything jump out in particular that people want to talk about? I have a few things. I mean, I think the Adderall or the AUC med of Socrates is quite accurate, especially with the opposition to drowsiness, right? So there's a real sense in which Socrates is figuring himself as a awakening drug here. We've had times where Socrates has explicitly been called like a wizard or a drug dealer or whatever. But here he's literally like a performance enhancing horse stimulant.
Yeah, that's what I recognize as well. It's like, ADHD meds just talking to me and trying to make a case for itself to not quit them or not back away from them.
It's like it's telling you that God appointed him to be, and so I will say even if I do point out that Socrates, again, was probably okay with the fascist totalitarian coup in Athens that had just happened. And it's also, I do think Socrates was good medication for Athens. I mean, who can deny? I certainly don't deny that. I would rather Athens take Socrates Adderall than not. It did lead to them killing him. So, did that result in them not having any Adderall at all, or did it result? I don't know. Yeah, did they actually get a replacement for him? Because he says I think it's so funny when he says, "Neglected by affairs like business and hasn't I don't know my kids' names. I just say you. I don't, it's like, and he's like, he frames all that as like, I've been helping Athens this whole time and y'all won't even thank me. Yeah, I know he did bring his like wife to the trial, I think, but doesn't say much about that. So it's interesting that the voice that speaks to Socrates and comes from God only says no. Only I don't know how to quite take that. But this moment is really important, I think, because so like it just shows us this generalized writing thing kind of in a specific example, right? So if we look at like, okay, where did writing in its proper sense? We had writing in its sense. Here it is. Okay. So, right, like, of course, so I say, of course, it's not easy stuff, but there's this basic opposition we all have of like writing versus speech. I think one of the things that's really hard about getting a sense of Derrida's argument here is that writing is generalized away from its sort of material example, right? Because writing, as in making marks on sensible material, paper, whatever, sure, that's what writing is, but it doesn't have anything to do with like the things Plato actually talks about. He doesn't talk about ink, right? I mean, maybe he does somewhere, but that's not the arguments about writing all have to do with absence to self, too democratic, bad son, orphan stuff, right? So there's no reason why. So if you're like a bad son in another way, like you're still, we generalize writing, right? And so when you speak for a father who is not present, that structurally is a writing position. That's what writing has always done for speech, and what speech has always done for thoughts, like in the soul, sort of. There's this like telephone game of getting back to what's the most internal thing. And I think at one point we were like, speech is still not immediate. It's still speaking it's closer than writing, right? And so like Plato is writing after Socrates is dead, speaking for Socrates, making the voice speak, just as writing makes speech speak, repeats what speech says, just as Socrates repeats what God told him in his head. He is his voice. It's really like wild what he's saying. I mean, just I've heard since I was a child, I've heard it in a voice in my head, and it has made me want to take care of Athens by being basically ADHD meds and going to everyone's house to be good. And, I even just I barely speak to my family to do it, but I don't know. The recursive thing is important argumentatively, just because if Plato can't distinguish his own argumentation from what he hates about writing, then his argumentation like has less force or no force. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So then we get this good bad writing thing.
Just before that, maybe so I haven't really grasped like from the stuff that preceded why he now says that writing is deformed at its very birth, like that already it's the origin is already. Wait, what does he sense? A specific?
Nothing is in.
It's not a good word.
Yeah.
So how did that flow from the preceding? I didn't see the thread really that ties it together. Maybe.
So it's So he says, now what about the accused? And up to now, written speech has had no other status. So when he says up to now, I do think it's like, it would be nice if you could specify a little bit more what he means by up to now. I mean, like, up to now in his reading, up to now, we're pretty far in the reading, etc. But he has basically, the claim is that the critique of written speech, I think, as Derrida has analyzed it up to now, was never that writing, like the type of writing itself, irrespective of what it did to what is written, was bad, right? And here we're going to get two different types of writing: good writing, bad writing. And this is the first time where we have writing that's bad at the origin, and rather than just bad because it doesn't go back to the father well enough, that it's sort of it can't be. It's constitutively and inevitably orphan instead of being a sort of a lost son who's strayed that could maybe come back, or that could, etc. That's the distinction as I see it right here. I think it'll be clear because like he hasn't explained that yet. But like,
Okay.
like I too was just like, I think we've said so many horrible things about writing up to now. It's weird to hear that. I don't know if that was your reaction, partially because it's like, it seems like writing is bad in of itself, etc. So what's the distinction here? At least that's where my head was at here. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I was like, why at this point does he bring it up right at this moment?
Yeah. So I guess we'll see here, like, yes, there was. Okay. I guess, okay, let's read this next part and talk more about it, because I'm not sure if what I said just now was right. I think it's sort of right, sort of, I'm feeling some flapping. What's that word? I don't know, some in my head. But I think, okay. Yeah, I'll read the next part. In its content, this exchange has nothing original about it. Alcidamas said more or less the same thing. But it marks a sort of reversal in the functioning of the argument. While presenting our writing as a false brother, traitor, infidel, and simulacrum, Socrates is for the first time led to envision the brother of this brother, the legitimate one, as another sort of writing, not merely as a knowing. So this is the older brother. Living not merely as a knowing, living, animate discourse, but as an inscription of truth in the soul. It is no doubt usually assumed that what we are dealing with here is a metaphor. Plato, why not, and so what? Pourquoi pas, et alors? Thought so too. Perhaps at the moment the history of this metaphor, etc., in the wax of the mind or soul was being engaged or even inaugurated, a metaphor philosophy will never thereafter be able to do without, however uncritical its treatment might be. But it is not any less remarkable here that the so-called living discourse should suddenly be described by a metaphor borrowed from the order of the very thing one is trying to exclude from it, the order of its simulacrum. Yet this borrowing is rendered necessary by that which structurally links the intelligible to its repetition in the copy, and the language describing dialectics cannot fail to call upon it. So I think here we have just a slight complication. I mean, it's not slight, but it's a complication the sort of the criticism up to now. So if we say like, okay, in the Phaedrus, writing on the soul moment, this is one. Okay, we up to now, I think might be up to now in the Phaedrus. Could be the up to now is like, I want to look at the Barbara Johnson, but I do Derrida does sometimes not to limit that sort of adverbial clauses like that. I'm used to being like, Derrida, do you mean up to now in the text? Do you mean up to now in your argument? Do you mean up to now? So, but whatever up to now means, here he's trying to say like, okay, if we're gonna say their writing equals bad son, philosophy, as if compelled by its own automatism, it can't help but say, okay, well, a good son, i.e. a good writing, because it has to be of the same genos, has to be of the same type, would be knowledgeable writing on the soul that is not democratic, like to whom you say it, etc. And then there is this is something that I think is worth if you have in your mind like a box of Derrida sort of Derridemes, riffs, or things you repeat and the Derrida repeats, this metaphor thing is something to add to that box, or even to create the box with, because he's like, that's not a metaphor, is like something he's always he's gonna say over and over. And the basic claim is like, a metaphor is by essence and according to its concept an unnecessary pedagogical linguistic comparison, and it's pedagogical even if you're speaking about literature, because it gives you the concept to which it with which it is functioning, and erases itself with just a metaphor. And if you go to Greece, like in Greece, you hop on a metaphor, like trains are metaphors. Metaphors. So it's just transit, right? So Derrida's point, whenever he says it's not a metaphor, is always like, this is not just a metaphor. If by metaphor you mean a comparison that does not have anything to do with the compared entities except to get you to them. Like, because the response could be, well, Socrates doesn't really think you write stuff on the soul, Mr. Derrida. He's just making a comparison. And Derrida's like, yeah, dude, I know. The point is, this metaphor is a symptom that is structurally necessary. And he says that which structurally links to the intelligible, to its repetition in the copy, and the language describing dialectics cannot fail to call upon it. And then here, I'll read this next. I think, yeah, I'll read these next two paragraphs, and then, because they'll help. Quiet, AI! It's like always comes up. I don't know how I keep. Okay. According to a pattern that will dominate all Western philosophy, so it's kind of a big deal. Good writing, natural living, knowledgeable, intelligible, internal speaking, is opposed to bad writing, a moribund, ignorant, external, mute artifice for the senses. And the good one can be designated only through the metaphor of the bad one. Metaphoricity is the logic of contamination and the contamination of logic. Bad writing is for good a model of linguistic designation and a simulacrum of essence. And if the network of opposing predicates that link one type to the other contains in its meshes all the conceptual oppositions of Platonism, here considered the dominant structure of the history of metaphysics, really no question about that, in my view, then it can be said that philosophy is played out in the play. This played out is I would say like, I assume it's like translating I assume Barbara Johnson really likes to translate Siju as played out, and that's like, it doesn't mean played out, means at play, Just because played out means it has it doesn't necessarily mean this, but can have a very strong meaning of being done. Whereas it's not done, like played out. Oh, that's played out. It's already exhausted of possibility. In played out, and then played out in the play is like, I would have to look at it to see the redoubling there, but it's played out between two kinds of writing, right? We only have pharmacons to choose from. We only have types of writing to choose from. Whereas all it wanted to do was distinguish between writing and speech. So it's like Platonism tried to distinguish between writing and speech, and it ends up turning speech into a type of writing, and not much more than the converse. Structurally, it's more than the converse, right? Dialectics wanted to call non-dialectics a Pharmacon writing, and then it ended up starting to talk about dialectics as a certain kind of Pharmacon, an anti-drug drug, a sort of methadone clinic for the, and so it ends up not having an alternative to drugs, right? It is later confirmed that the conclusion of the Phaedrus is less a condemnation of writing in the name of present speech than a preference for one sort of writing over another, for the fertile trace over the sterile trace, for a seed that engenders because it is planted inside over a seed scattered wastefully outside at the risk of dissemination. This, at least, is presumed by that. I would like the French, please, Madam Johnson. Okay, we're trying to account for this in terms of the general strict Platonism. Let's follow this way a bit. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. That was kind of an intense day, so I think it's like we give ourselves a little bit, but like we talk, maybe we talk about this a little, and then that probably don't read anymore, if that's okay. But questions, thoughts about this metaphor stuff, about the like soul stuff. It's a big moment, and it's a big moment for Derrida, and it's also, I think this is the lines that Agamben is like, he goes back to the Greek, he's like, actually, this means all of deconstruction is false. So I haven't tracked that down. I'm quite skeptical of that. There's Agamben, basically every book or article is like, and also, Derrida peed his pants in the second grade. Like, he's like always just like taking really random shots at Derrida. That I haven't read it, so I'm going to track it down. But he thinks like he can reread this example and destroy all deconstruction, basically, which maybe I should read it. Maybe I'm scared too. Maybe I'm scared that everything will be wrong, but I suspect not. Anyway, thoughts or responses or questions or anything. We're so close to the end of this text. We're tantalized. Yeah, go ahead.
Just about the structural necessity of the metaphor. Like we talked about how I guess I'm not quite sure what structurally necessary. What I mean, you can't go without can't circumvent writing in a sense, right? Because we've said like memory is finite. You have to inscribe just for the items or whatever to be repeated. You have to make some inscription. And so in like a certain sense, you can't get around writing. Even like it requires this metaphor. It's not like what did you write? It's not unnecessary, right? It requires it in like a very strict way.
Mm-hmm.
How I'd read it, yeah.
So are you so if I'm hearing you correctly, like you're wondering about the why did we have to do brother of this brother, two types of, like, you understand why writing in a structural way and in a maybe even in a figural way is in a general way necessary for Platonism, necessary to dimension, etc. But this specific good brother, bad brother, you don't see as much the struggle. You want to talk? Is that your question?
I know. I mean, I didn't even formulate the question. I guess.
Sorry.
No. It's fine. I was just if I got that right. So in this sense, like why it's structurally necessary. Okay, this that I just wanted to make sure. And
So I think that there is I think that the form of the structural necessity here is any criticism of a bad son or of a straying child or a lost son necessarily implies, even if not stated, a form of a good son. And that means somebody and a good son has to be of the same type, right? Of the same genos of the bad son. It has to, because the whole point is that it's not that they're under the same father, and they, it could have been otherwise, right? So it has to be another type of writing, right? It can't be that writing, in order for this criticism or accusation, in order for a paternal accusation to hold, it has to always be possible to have done otherwise. And so it has to be, a good son would have to be of the same nature as the bad son. And so here, Socrates, so if Western metaphysics is constituted by exclusion and domination of writing, and that this always has a paternal character to it, that means that Western metaphysics also constitutively, for its counterexample, has to give us a good version of writing. That's this. And there's no way to account for the very, 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 very common use of metaphorics like this throughout the history of philosophy, of a sort of spiritized, knowledgeable soul, and writing as thought about like that. But once you've said good speech is another type of writing, then all the reasons that are much more inherent to how the structure of writing works, basically you've let the parasite or the contaminant in, or you've let once you've conceded like methadone helps with heroin addiction, you can no longer say all drugs are bad, right? In the same way, like once you've conceded that there's knowledgeable, soulful speech, which is a type of writing, you can no longer say writing as such is bad, if that's what you want to say. I don't know. Is that help, or is that? Do you have any other thoughts?
No, that's good. That's good. And like the two types of writing are later on the distinguished by who they can address, like this about now he says the term like dissemination, the sowing of the seeds, like whether you like scattered wastefully or like implanted very specifically. I mean, this was this whole thing also about the, if I remember correctly, about the dialectic that Socrates mentions in the dialogue, about knowing the types of souls, and how you can adjust and you should adjust your speech accordingly. Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. Like, and yeah, I remember I read the Phaedrus last semester to write on, Reddit, and like that section of like the 11 different types or something of souls is totally insane. And the like question of which soul you're talking to, there's like a real sense in which good, it's like, the radically democratic character of writing, is bad insofar as anybody could receive it, and that makes like rhetoric impossible in a certain way, because rhetoric is supposed to be responding. For Socrates to be, you have to know the type of soul of the person you're talking to and adjust to it, and that's how you win. Yeah, if you philosophy is about like, is spreading seeds so as to impregnate well versus just having it go everywhere. Okay. And that's kind of what writing democracy do. Yeah, I don't remember what he's referring to here. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know about y'all. I had a great time. This was fantastic. Thank y'all for doing this today. It's great to have you back, Riki. I know that's like, there's a feeling maybe of like, oh, you may, don't, we have been flailing around so much that you're caught up. I just consider yourself caught up. We've been, so it's awesome to be back. And then, we're tantalizing. Like, I think that we like, we're very close to, I can't wait to like at the end we can finally like, there's instructions for how to make drugs at the end, I'm sure. I was sad against those, but yeah, okay, right. Thank you all. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it a lot. I'll also DM you later on today because it's harder to speak about it than it is to write about it.
Yeah,
for
please.
me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I appreciate both of you a lot. I also appreciate you a lot, Nona, for asking very important questions. I was kind of afraid to ask.
Yeah, no problem. I also like this. This is such a monstrous text. It's very difficult to keep afloat. Yeah.
So I think this was great, and I think
Yep, awesome. That was great for me too. Great. All right. Okay, cool. So yeah, talk to y'all soon.
Bye bye.
All right.